Well, I suppose we can summarise it in two parts, really. For the first 20 years or so of my career, I had the dubious pleasure to be involved in the stock market. I started off at an old traditional firm in Manchester, and then in 1984, along with a partner, I went to a small investment management company. And gradually, over the years, we built that up into a very substantial concern. And by 1996, we had around £500 million under management and 4 or 5 offices, about 120 to 30 staff. But by 1996, as you can imagine, that happens to be a career when then at the age of 41, you're pretty well burnt out. And frankly, when a management buyout team came to me with what I felt was a pretty generous offer, I decided to take early retirement. But that wasn't the only reason. It wasn't just the money. It was the fact, to be honest with you, I'd got fed up of wearing suits. So I thought a career change was about due. So following on from that, I became part of what was dubiously called Business Angels. And Business Angels really is a group of people from different backgrounds in life who are looking to help and mentor, and not just with financial backing, to make small businesses grow into something worthwhile. And you have to understand that in the world of business, the bigger you are, then the easier it is to borrow money. So to borrow £1 million is a lot easier than to borrow £10,000. So Business Angels seemed a good move to me to get into something that was completely different. And obviously buying a garage in 2001, you couldn't get any further removed from the stock market. But it wasn't simply to invest in that business or to invest in those people. It was for me to have some sort of participation where I felt the skills that I'd learned in all my years in working in the stock market would be put to good use into something, whilst it was different, that fundamentally it had the same principles. That's customer service, identifying opportunities, making sure that you've got stringent financial controls. So those are all principles that apply regardless of what the business is, whether it's a big multinational company like Sky Television or simply a news agent on the corner of a street. So that's how I arrived at the garage trade. And in essence, there was one other reason, and that is, like lots of people, I'd always had a keen interest in cars. Didn't have a clue how to mend them or how they worked, but they were always a fascination. Particularly those models of my youth in the 60s and 70s, so the Capris and the Cortinas and the Minis and the Austin 1100s. Those are always a great fascination. And in the stock market, there are various gurus that you'll come across. And most of them, frankly, aren't worth the time of day. But there is one that has always had my utmost respect, and that's a gentleman called Warren Buffett. And Warren Buffett is referred to as the Sage of Omaha. Now, to acquire that title, it means that over the years, he's given to us all words of great wisdom. And one of those principles, as far as Warren Buffett was concerned, is only invest in businesses that you have an interest for and that you understand how it works. And to some degree, I did have an interest because I was interested in cars, and I did understand the basic principles. So that's how we arrived at the garage business, and ultimately how we've arrived today at Little Belters. And the stimulation for Little Belters really came along some years ago now, when my own 2 daughters, they passed the driving test, they were going to go off to university. I need to get them a car. I didn't want to pay a fortune for it. I didn't want to pay massive insurance premiums. But I did want something that was reliable. I wanted it to be safe. And I wanted to know that I was going to get it from somewhere that would look after me. And there wouldn't be just this initial urge to sell me a car, and then really not take any interest after that. So that was the motivation. I didn't do it at the time, but over the years I've got something that I think is now commonly referred to as brain itch. So ever since then, I wanted to do something where we could expand on the knowledge and the facilities and also the experience at Lee Autos. And I knew that the car business was something that we could look to explore. And certainly I spent a good 6 months to a year doing my research, doing the background, before we actually launched Little Belters. So that's how we arrived at Little Belters, as it is today. It's a film that I thoroughly enjoy, and I must have watched it now 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
And there are certain aspects of it that ring very true, because in many ways it's not dissimilar to the world of buying and selling cars. Certainly there are plenty of wolves, and forgive me, some wild animals on Wall Street, and if you're not careful you've a very good chance of being eaten alive. And there is that comparison with the world of buying cars. But nevertheless, there are certain principles that I've always held, and in truth have always held me in good stead, and reduced the number of hours that I had not sleeping at night to as few as possible. And that was that both myself and my partner at the time came from similar backgrounds. I came from a council estate in Stockport, he came from a council estate in Birkenhead on the Wirral. But we had both grown up with the great benefit, and I say a great benefit, of having wonderful parents. And despite the fact that we weren't particularly wealthy, in fact we were incredibly poor, the one thing they instilled on us was the morals of honesty and integrity and honour. And those principles held us in good stead, even in the world of finance and the stock market. And the old principle of my word is my bond wasn't just some glib saying that we had. We held it very dear. And in fact, we adopted a principle with all of our staff, and that was to treat every client as though it was your mum and dad. I use the word mum because it was my mum. I never used the word mum. I perhaps did in later on in life when I'd made a few bob and I got a bit posh, but it was always my mum. So for me, you could have those attributes of honesty, integrity, not talking down to people, not trying to be smart, and understanding the enormous responsibility that was on your shoulders. So unlike Wolf of Wall Street, which to some degree is a bit disappointing because it glorifies and almost encourages people that there is some great benefit in ripping people off. Well, there is, but sadly the only benefit is the massive money they make by conning people. So in that respect, I love the film. I thought there were bits in it that were great, but I'm not too sure it's the real moral message that we'd like to pass on to our children and grandchildren. But in business, you can be the good guys, and I can assure you, you can win, but you've got to stick to your principles. Well, this is quite interesting nowadays because all of these screens, which are now flat screens of course, and you can get them for a few £100s. When I was heavily involved in the stock market in the middle 80s, late 80s and into the early 90s, whilst these things did exist, there were of course much bigger things, a bit like you and me had recognised as the old big Ferguson televisions. And our job, of course, was to, when we were investing money for clients, was to have as much information as you possibly can. And I cannot stress that the more information you have in any business, then the more likely it is that you'll be a great benefit to your customer, but also stand a much better chance of succeeding. And again, on the stock market, there's lots of phrases that are used, and a well-worn one is the one by one of the great golfers, I think it was Arnold Palmer, who was one day accused of being lucky. And he replied to that by saying, yeah, it's amazing because the more I practice, the luckier I become. And that principle applied certainly to the stock market, because the more information you had and the more that you did your research and the more you carried out analysis, then the more likely it was that you would be successful in the type of shares you chose, and ensuring hopefully that your clients had the luxury of sleeping at night. And ironically, what's happened now is that to a large degree we have that well-worn phrase, a level playing field. And a level playing field gives us all, because I don't do anything that you couldn't do yourselves, is based on acquiring information and having that information and then analysing it, making sure what it means. And the only way you can get that in this modern day is by having these things. And just the same as my lads who are in the workshop have their wrenches and their tools and all of those other things in this enormous toolbox that they spend fortunes on with Snap-on and so on. Well, this is my toolbox, because it's on these screens that in essence I'm carrying out the same procedures as I did 20 years ago in the stock market. And that is to gather information, decide what it is it's telling me, and then reach some conclusions. So these screens are in essence nothing different than different stock markets around the world. But in this instance, what they are is in fact auction houses. And these are different auction places where I can go online virtually 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. If my wife is watching the dancing program or the cooking program, then I'm quite interested to get my laptop out and seeing what's going on. Because the one thing I understand, and I hope you probably do as well as a consumer, is that this is an ever-changing picture. On average nowadays, we're probably seeing in excess of 2,000 to 3,000 cars going through the various auction houses, and some of them will be gems, and quite a few will in fact be lemons. So my task is to find the gems from the lemons, or as my dad used to say, sort the wheat from the chaff. So in essence, all these are our auction houses. They're telling me what vehicles are coming up. We usually have 2 or 3 days notice, but bearing in mind that's changing on a daily basis and an hourly basis, so vehicles are being added all the time. And that gives me some warning of what I will be looking for in the coming week. So by close of business on Sunday, despite having all of these opportunities open to us, or supposed opportunities, we've condensed that down to probably looking at no more than up to 100 vehicles. So we've identified the vehicles that we wish to buy. We know the reasons why we want to buy them. We know what our customers are looking for. And by Monday morning at 7:30, we're in a position to put all these lovely machines on and to start the task of finding those gems. And as I said a moment ago, I don't do anything, and my colleagues here don't do anything, that you couldn't do yourself. And that's pretty true of anything. You see, I suppose if I went to night school, I could be a bricklayer, or I could be a plasterer, or I could be an electrician. There is one slight problem with that, is that whilst I could learn how to do it, I have no interest in it. And ultimately, I think that would mean I wouldn't be very good. So, we don't do anything you couldn't do yourselves, but whether you could dedicate the resources and the time to doing this is somewhat debatable. But that's what these screens are about. They are, in essence, to provide nothing more than me having a better opportunity to find those gems of cars that we know are out there, but my goodness me, you've got to go through an awful lot to find them. So that's the reasons for the screens.